Jonas Green had worked in Philadelphia with the most famous printer in America, a guy named Benjamin Franklin. And I wish I could give you a whole little bio of Benjamin Franklin, but if you don't know him, he's kind of a big deal. And so Jonas Green had worked with Benjamin Franklin, and then he got a job with the colony of Maryland as the Maryland colonial printer in 1738. So he and his wife, Catherine, moved down to Maryland, and in Annapolis, he was working as the Maryland colonial printer. And after several years of that work, he added a very time consuming side job as he and his wife, Catherine, revived the Maryland Gazette, which, remember, had been critical to Maryland's political culture before its publisher took a competing job with Virginia years earlier. But the Gazette was back, baby, 1745. And the Gazette listed Jonas Green as the publisher. But Anne worked closely with Jonas, even setting the type, that thing that we talked about before, how intricate and complicated it was. But for, sort of observing the conventions of the time, they didn't list Anne as co-publisher or anything like that. The Gazette would now maintain a long history going forward. So this is you keeping your promise to yourself that you'd have some more notes on the Gazette coming, but now make another promise to yourself that there will be even more notes on the Gazette coming as we go forward. You make a lot of promises to yourself, but I feel like you're going to keep them. In 1751, Charles Calvert, the 5th Lord Baltimore, got dead. Now, he had several children. His oldest son, Frederick, had been born back in 1731. This is the Frederick for whom Fredericktown and Frederick County may or may not have been named. So Frederick Calvert, in 1751, upon the death of his father, became the 6th Lord Baltimore. Frederick Calvert was a bit of a mess. I was thinking, is that subjective? Am I being too harsh to him? I think that he knew that he was a mess. And the people who knew him commented on him as a mess. He got married in 1753. But they had a tumultuous marriage, spent most of their time apart, apparently argued with each other violently, and they became formally separated in 1756, though they still sometimes saw each other for formal occasions. In 1758, he appears to have thrown his wife out of a moving carriage, in which she was significantly injured. After that, they didn't appear publicly anymore, although they apparently remained married. They had no children. And from that time on, they appear to have lived entirely apart. He spent profligately and appears to have had sex with any woman that he could, through seduction, through coercion, through paying. His father, George Calvert, the 5th Lord Baltimore, were he still alive, watching his son cavort in the 1750s, would not have been pleased. Calvert could spend like this because there was plenty of money coming in from Maryland. The estimate that he took in monthly that I've seen in Maryland, I tried to do some, you know, inflation calculations and conversion calculations, and it's something like $3 to $4 million a month in our American dollars today. $3 to $4 million a month flowing back to Frederick Calvert. Unlike his dad, he took almost no interest in the politics of Maryland. Instead, he traveled across Europe. He lived in Italy. He lived in Constantinople. Um, they, the authorities in Constantinople threw him out, apparently for keeping a harem. A bit of a mess. He also appears to have done large amounts of whatever drugs he could get his hands on in the 1700s, and will you be surprised to find out he liked to drink. Okay, so Frederick Calvert appoints governors, sends them over, but is not very involved in what's going on in Maryland. We'll come back to him later on. Maybe he'll turn his act around and become, responsible member of society. We'll see. Okay, we're sliding into this key term that's labeled as 18th century Maryland life. You see it up there in the corner, giving you a heads up. I hope you do on the video. It's there if you look at the PowerPoint. 18th century Maryland life. And so we're going to sort of slide around, hit lots of different aspects of life, and fold it into what will be your answer for this key term. First, a little bit population. Maryland's population was about 40,000 in 1710 and about 150,000 by 1750. Those numbers are not precise. When I remember numbers in my head, I sort of round them off, but those are approximate. And that gives you the sort of rate of increase, right? So like 40,000, 1710, by 1750, like 150,000. That's rapidly growing. In the early 1700s, where we're sort of meandering around here, the majority of the population in Maryland was now born in Maryland. It's no longer a place that's, overwhelmingly immigrants having come from England or Ireland. It's majority native born, and that proportion of native born increased steadily through the 1700s. There were in Maryland about 30% of the white men that didn't own land. But that means about 70% of the white men did. And that was an incredible land of opportunity compared to what still existed back in England. And remember that political rights were widely held. And one of the interesting things about early Maryland and the way that it persists a little bit with us today is that for political purposes, every county in Maryland was organized into what were called hundreds. There were not 100 of them. The number varied. So the counties are subdivided into these organizations known as hundreds. And the hundreds split the county up for purposes of taxation and for organizing elections. So on election day, you don't have to ride from the edge of the county to the county seat. Instead, you ride to the voting place within your hundred. These are the hundreds in down in St. Mary's, and here are the hundreds in Charles County. Sometimes, if we were in class, you might ask, why are they called hundreds? and it is not entirely clear. It seems like it originated back in England, and the idea was something like you split an area up so that that area could provide 100 men to fight for the king. But it's not entirely clear that that explanation is correct. Um, Nevertheless, this is how Maryland was split up. And what's interesting to me, hope to you, is that some of these persist as neighborhood names that we use today. Oh, I thought I had a map of Montgomery County. Oh, because it didn't exist yet. I'll show you later. Montgomery counties, hundreds. Spoiler, there's a Montgomery County coming. All right, sliding through different aspects of 18th century Maryland life, a notable shift from the 1600s to the 1700s was that in the 1700s, they were building much more stable and permanent houses. The houses built in the 1600s looked like they were built by people who weren't sure how long they would be here. The houses built in the 1700s look like they're built by people who are planning to be here for a long time. Tobacco was Maryland's most profitable crop, but you can't eat tobacco. Well, you can, but it's awful. It'll make you sick. Um, so corn was at the center of Marylanders' diet. The historians who study this estimate that Marylanders in the 1700s got more than half their total calories from corn. And if you're thinking, oh my God, how could like corn on the cob be half of everything that I eat? Well, they got creative. They ground the corn up, like you see here, that's corn. Ground it up and baked it into these cakes, which were often called Johnny cakes, named after me. That's not true. I don't know why they're called Johnny cakes, but let's go with it. Sometimes they were called hoe cake or pone. It's it's like bread, but it's corn. Um, they added water, turned it into porridge. They malted the corn and brewed it into beer. Corn, corn, corn. Because corn stored well once dried, they ate it year round. Corn, corn, corn. What they do for fun? Well, they like to watch fights. Cockfighting, that's roosters in a ring, like you see up in the top right. Cockfighting, bear fighting, bullfighting, and sometimes mixing it up, as you see here, a bull versus a bear. The bear on a pole, chained to a pole to try to make it more even for the bull. All of these, of course, not all, most, end with an animal's death, witnessed in front of the crowd. While this is happening, there's of course plenty of drinking and gambling. Lots and lots of gambling. These, bears are captured from the Maryland wilderness, and the attacks on bears, they skin them, they make bear skin coats and rugs, um, was part of a broader assault on Maryland's native species, which was wiping out some animals with incredible speed. In 1757, the Maryland Assembly passed a law to create deer season. a particular time of the year in which hunting deer was allowed, banned through the rest of the year. It was difficult to enforce, but it was an effort to try to like keep an animal around. Some of the gentlemen tried to introduce um, fox catching, where they'd have these dogs and chase the foxes on their horses, wearing outfits that make them think they're English country gentlemen. They were cute. Maybe. Horse racing was starting to become central to Maryland's culture in the 1700s. Horse racing sprung up in particular at the tobacco loading points along the bay and along Maryland's rivers. It was like the guys who owned the tobacco plantations would load up their tobacco crop, load it into barrels to be put onto ships, and they'd bring to the tobacco loading spot their fanciest, fastest horse. And other guys did the same thing. And so they would start organizing these quarter-mile horse races. This early love of horse racing would continue to develop as we go forward through Maryland. I don't really have a slide for it, but quickly, there was no real public education system in Maryland in the colonial period. It was opposed by all the wealthier people in Maryland who had tutors for their kids. They hired a private tutor to teach their kids, and then they would send them on to William and Mary, which is not in Maryland, but in Virginia. These Maryland gentry, as they styled themselves, sent their kids to a Virginia institution rather than try to develop one in Maryland. Unless you were somebody as rich as Daniel Delaney, who sent his son, Daniel Delaney, to England to study at Cambridge. Yeah, so no real public education system. Tobacco was central to Maryland's economy. And you can see that tobacco cultivation increased as the 1700s went on. As I mentioned before, and I think we talked about earlier, the tobacco is grown in the fields, dried in a shed, and then packed into barrels to be shipped across the ocean. So all these barrels you see, they're the shipping containers of the 18th century. In the next video, we'll flesh some of this out a little bit more.